I know that you guys are all here to hear Alison. Alison joined the Rovers because she wanted to become a backpacker, and really because she wanted to hike the Superior Hiking Trail. Alison has presented it to us before in 2018 about making it to day 4, about solo backpacking for a week on the Colorado Trail. And this time she's going to be talking about her first solo backpacking trip and the first time she struggled to make it to day 4 on the Superior Hiking Trail. And she's going to tell us all about how not to start a backpacking trip and how satisfying it is to make it to the end. Alison has been in the Rovers for a number of years, and the first year, or early on when she started backpacking, she completed all 300 miles of the Superior Hiking Trail in 7 trips. And now she teaches other Rovers about backpacking and coordinates other backpacking trips. She's also been on the board, so she's done her time and encourages other Rovers to take a turn serving the club as a board member. So Alison, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
So as Fran said, this is all about making it to day 4. And she also mentioned that I was here in 2018 talking about making it to day 4 on the Colorado Trail. And the way that this whole making it to day 4 thing started was that I got back from my Colorado Trail trip, and I was talking to a colleague, and he asked how the trip was, and I said, "Oh, it was fantastic." And I started talking about it, and then I said, "Oh, except day 2. Day 2 really sucked." And he said, "Oh, day 2 always sucks." And he's used to doing like Boundary Waters trips and other like paddling trips and stuff. And he said, day 2 always sucks. And so I thought back about all sorts of trips that I'd taken that were at least 4 days. And you know what? He's absolutely right. Like all of my long trips, day 2 always sucked for one reason or another. And so that was my in talking about the Colorado Trail. But it turns out it also makes so much sense for this trip as well. And so I started backpacking. As cliche as it sounds, because I read Wild. And there's me with Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wild. She was speaking at Concordia College for free. And I had a friend who said, "Hey, I'm going to go see this author in a couple of weeks. Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay. I don't have anything else going on." So I figured I'd better read the book first. So I got the book and read it cover to cover. It was just like, this is so cool. I need to do this whole backpacking thing, but I couldn't do the Pacific Crest Trail. I have 2 kids, had half-time custody. They were like 11 and 12 at the time, maybe 12 and 13, whatever. So I had stretches of 5 days to work with. And then I heard about the Superior Hiking Trail thing up on the North Shore. It's like 300 miles, and it goes from just south of Duluth all the way up to the Canadian border. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I can do this whole thing, and I can't do it all at once. Can't do the full 300 miles in 5 days, but I can definitely knock it off in a series of trips. And so the plan was hatched, and that's what I wanted to do. So then I was sitting over lunch with a friend at work, and I told her about my plan. I said, "I'm going to learn how to backpack, and I'm going to do this trail." And she said, "Oh, well, my mother-in-law's in this group called the Minnesota Rovers. You got to join. Go check them out." So I found the Rovers online, went to a first meeting, was totally hooked. And so here I am 3 months later on my very first Rover trip. It was up in Bayfield. And I had a whole bunch of questions about backpacking. Now, I started out growing up, doing a lot of camping, but it was always state park camping and scout camp camping. So I knew things like building fires and, using map and compass and just your basic camping stuff, but I'd never done any backpacking. And so I knew that this was new. And so then I started asking all these questions. And I can remember the end of this day, in fact, sitting around in the house that was rented, that we were staying in, sitting around in the living room, asking a whole bunch of questions. And I remember Kim and Jamal being there. And Jamal just answering a ton of questions, and Scott and Jody were there, and I can remember they answered a bunch too. There were others there, but I learned so much from all those people on that trip that was gonna serve me in the future. And of course, I also joined Facebook and joined the Superior Hiking Trail Facebook group. Asked a whole bunch of questions there. So I did my homework. I kind of knew what I was doing. I also started going out on training hikes. I had a pack, which a friend gave me. She had tried backpacking and didn't like it. So she said, "Here's a pack, just take it." It was a good pack, actually. I still have it and still use it on longer trips. So I got to the point in my training and building up to this where I could load my pack up to 45 pounds, which is heavier than I really wanted it to ever be. But I could put extra weight in there and I could go out to Afton and I could do like basically all the trails at Afton in a day. The North Loop, the South Loop, all along the river, the whole thing, like 16 miles, 45-pound pack, and I could survive. And at that point I thought, okay, I'm ready for this. So for a final check, a shakedown trip, I did my first backpacking overnight with a Rover friend, Haida, who I had met on that trip in Bayfield just a few months earlier. And we did 12.5 miles out and 12.5 miles back at Wild River State Park. It's about an hour from the Twin Cities, so it was a good distance. The terrain's fairly flat, so it wasn't like doing the hills of the Superior Hiking Trail, but then again, I didn't know what those hills of the Superior Hiking Trail were like at that point. But it was still a good trip and I did just fine. Practiced all that stuff, like hanging a bear bag. Actually, no, then I think I must have had a bear can, like the heavy bear canisters. So I did that, practice filtering water, using camp stove, the little tiny backpacking stove, all that kind of stuff. So I got to practice all those skills and I thought, you know what, I am totally ready for this. So this was the plan I hatched. Like I said, I had these 5 days to work with, right? And so what that meant is that I would drop my kids off at school at like 7 o'clock and then on a Friday. So from 7 o'clock on a Friday, that's my cue. I can leave, I can have everything in the car and I can just drop them off and keep driving. And then I just need to be back to pick them up from school at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. No problem, I can do this. And so what I planned based on that whole, being able to do 16 miles, with a heavier pack than what I was going to take out at Afton, was I figured I can probably do like 15-mile days, give or take. And so that's what I planned for the Superior Hiking Trail, not fully understanding what it was going to be about. And so my plan was the Split Rock River to Crosby-Manitou State Park. Not bad. Or was it? And so, like I said, my plan was to go up the day before, leave right away at 7 o'clock. And I decided not to hire a shuttle because it was, I was going to be, you could call it frugal or cheap, depending, probably cheap. So I didn't get a shuttle. I decided I was going to do a bike shuttle, especially since I was going to have time anyway. So what I did was I reserved a backpacking site at Split Rock Lighthouse State Park. It turns out there's one only a half mile from the spur trail that leads to the SHT. So I'd be nice and close, only a half mile away. And my plan was to go and set up camp in that backpacking site. So I had a guaranteed site where I was going to have my stuff. And I would set it up and leave all my camping gear there. I would drive up to Crosby-Manitou and bike back. So I didn't have to carry all my stuff. It was all sitting in the tent, right? And so that was my plan. And I was going to do that on that Friday, hoping for good weather, of course. And as it happened, at the same time, I was really trying to get a different job. I was eager to move on from the job I was in. And I got a call, a few days before the trip and from one of the jobs I'd applied for and said, "Hey, you want to interview? We only have one spot open left and it's on Friday at 2 o'clock. And I'm like, oh, great. Okay, I'm going to take it. So I did this interview Friday at 2 o'clock, right? I ended up working in the morning, still did this interview. And then I went home because I hadn't had everything packed and in the car. I had to drive home to pick up all my stuff. So now I'm on the road instead of at 7 in the morning, it's probably 4 or 5, something like that. And so I get home, change, throw the bike in the car, start driving, get up to Forest Lake and I go to change lanes. And so the way that my bike fits in the car is it kind of goes in the trunk with the seats laid down, and then the pack goes in the laid down seat. And when I turned around to change lanes, I noticed my pack wasn't there. So what did I forget on my first backpacking trip solo? Everything, all of it, the whole pack. So at that point, I turned around, went back, picked this whole thing up, at which point I realized, great, I'm going to be hiking into my first site in the dark. But no worries, I got a headlamp, I can do this. And so that's what I did. I drove back. As it turned out, Cuba had just opened up for cultural exchange. So the Minnesota Orchestra was there playing for the first time in I don't know how many years. And it corresponded to exactly when I left home that second time and exactly when I pulled into the parking lot at Split Rock. So I got to hear the whole concert. It was amazing. And I was really flying high because I was so ready to start this trip. I was super excited. Oh, and by the way, I get up the next morning in this beautiful site right on Lake Superior, socked in with fog. I could hear Lake Superior. It was right next to my tent. I couldn't see it. Totally gone in the fog. So I drove on up to Crosby-Manitou and started in on my bike ride. And then that picture on the right-hand side is Lax Lake, on the backside of Tettegouche State Park. So it's about a 28-mile ride, most of it downhill, but there's still plenty of up and down on that ride. It was like 7 miles of gravel on my road bike, which wasn't pleasant. You got some back roads and then the Gitchigami Trail. So it was a nice ride. Stopped in Beaver Bay, got a nice salmon lunch because, hey, why not take the time to stop and get a nice sit-down lunch? Like, what else do I have going on that day? You can see things starting to not go well already, right? So I get back to Split Rock and I have to park my bike right where the park entrance is, right where you're going in and the state park office right at the beginning. So that's where they said I could lock up my bike. So I did. I was going to leave it there for the whole 4 days, 5 days, whatever it was. And then I walked up to take the obligatory picture at the Lighthouse. But then I had to walk 3.5 miles along the Lakeshore Trail all the way back to my site to even get to my tent. So that was the first hike, and I'm doing this in my camp shoes. But by the time I got back there, see, it was in fact a beautiful site, and right on the lake, I could actually see the lake. Nice sunny day. I'm like, this is going to be a great, great trip. And so I set out, and it started to, get a little bit cloudy by the time I got over to the Split Rock River, and this was my first taste of what the SHT was all about. That third picture, that's the trail. And as it happens, there's a number of spots in the SHT that are like this: rocks, roots, mud, steep, really tough stuff. This was harder than anything I had done in any state park before. So this was a rude awakening. And my pack was probably like 42 pounds. So I didn't hit that 45 I've been training with, but it was probably 42. Did not pack well. But, I was still excited. And by the time I got up to the top, it was clear skies again. There was that beautiful river rushing down below, but then I was standing up on this ridge. I had Split Rock Lighthouse off behind me in the distance, of just a speck in the distance where I had just come from. So I was having a good day. And my goal was to get to Chapins Ridge campsite. And that's going to be the first one to the north after the Split Rock River campsites, if you're familiar with that section of trail. So there's 4 campsites along the Split Rock River, but they're notoriously busy. So my plan was to not camp at any of those. And besides, I had just started, remember? Like, I was still really close to my campsite from the night before. So I was going to go to Chapins Ridge. And I get there and the sun's starting to go down. Not down yet, but it's getting a little bit darker. And I get to the campsite and there's one guy there, single guy, and he's looking really scruffy. And this is my first night solo on the trail ever. And if there's one thing that I think women hear over and over again before a solo trip is, if it seems sketchy and you don't trust the people in the campsite, don't stay there, just keep going and find another spot. And I had heard that enough. And I didn't give it much thought until I saw this guy and I'm like, oh my gosh, this doesn't look good. And so I was just kind of spooked, right? It was my first night solo. And so I decided to keep going, even though it was getting too close to dark and I was really too worn out to keep going, but I did. And so instead I went to Beaver Pond. And so that's Beaver Pond. It's another 1.7 miles up the trail, kind of the 1.7 miles I didn't have in me. And it turns out the beavers were eager beavers who had decided to build their dam a little bit higher, raising the level of that beaver pond so that the beaver pond campsite was indeed in the beaver pond by a good couple inches. So the whole thing was essentially swamped, and I had to really kind of bushwhack to even find a place to put my tent. And it was getting dark at that point. And so what I did at this point was I set up my tent kind of off to the side. It was still pretty squishy, and so my feet were wet. Like I was already getting wet. My pants were wet. And then I sat down to make dinner, exhausted, kind of sore from all the tough hiking and all the biking and the too heavy pack. And I made dinner. I think it was like ramen noodles in my pot, and I couldn't eat it. I just couldn't. Like, my stomach was churning, and I had already made it, and I had taken a couple of bites, and I was just like, I can't keep this down. So now I'm freaked out. And so here's the status of the day at this point. So I started out with a 28-mile bike ride, did 5.6 miles of hiking without the pack because I had the 2 back to my car from my backpacking site, and then the 3 point, must have been 3.6 from the park office to the lighthouse, back down to my campsite, put on the pack, did another 10.7 to get to Beaver Pond. I was soaked. I was exhausted. I had this severe cramping. I was having like Charlie horses and cramping across my abdomen. And I'm in this tiny little camp, this tiny little tent where, I could only stretch out and stay straight. Oh, it was bad. I couldn't eat. I'm kind of freaked out because I don't know what to do with this cooked but uneaten food. And now I'm in bear country. And like, what do you do with that? Like, I knew how to, put my food in a bear canister, but like, what about this stuff that I haven't eaten? Oh, it was just a mess, and it was a disaster of a night. So I ended up going to bed, damp and just in pain, and like hoping like heck that the bear didn't come. I ended up dumping that food down into the backcountry latrine, which I didn't even know what a backcountry latrine was until this day. At least not completely. I'd never seen one, and so just hoping the bear wasn't going to come. Not a good day. So I wake up the next morning, I'm like, okay, so this is going to be a better day. Even though I'm wet, it's going to be all right. So what you can't see in those first 2 pictures is that as I started hiking, and you can see the rocks in the roots, and the steep again, but it was also raining, not heavily. It was just kind of lightly raining. And so I keep going, and the beaver pond doesn't look quite as dreary as it did the night before. And I'm wet, but I'm still okay. I'm doing this thing I wanted to do so bad. I get up to the top of this thing called Fault Line Ridge, which is just outside of Beaver Bay. And Fault Line Ridge is a really cool spot because there's this ridge. So you're up high in a ridge, but there was a fault line there. So like, I don't know, must be a couple hundred yards away. There's a cliff right straight across. And so it's just like this channel between these cliffs that moved at some point in the past, right? Except I couldn't see the other side because it was all socked in with fog when I got there, which was better than what happened after that. And that was that it started to pour buckets. And so here I am getting wet again. So I've got all my rain gear on, but I'm still wet inside. Finally, I make it over to the Beaver River. Maybe you've been through Beaver Bay. The river that runs through there, you can stop and picnic there right off Highway 61 and let your kids play around on the rocks. It's just a great place. This is about a half mile upriver from there, where the SHT goes by. And so I just stopped there on the rocks, had some lunch, and now I'm starting to feel a little better because I could even see peaks of sun. There was like blue sky. And I'm like, okay, this is going to get better. And so just as I finished up lunch, put my pack back on, when I heard thunder. And I had just enough time to take my pack back off, put on all my rain gear, get it back on and start moving, when it just started dumping again, like pouring buckets and thunder and lightning. And I'm just like trying to get, trying to get to someplace dry. And that was just not happening. So I hiked in the rain. There were 3 more downpours as I went up and over a couple of big hills to get over to Silver Bay. So Silver Bay is the next town up. It's only a few miles away. My plan was to actually go up to the next site on the SHT after Silver Bay, called Pean-Creek. But by the time I got halfway over to Silver Bay, having been soaked a couple of times at that point, I just said, no, I can't do this. I'm too wet. Like, everything I had was wet. My feet were wet. They had been wet from the night before. They were all like chewed up like hamburger. I had blisters. Things were not good. And I was soaked and I didn't know how I was going to get dry. So at that point, I changed plans and decided to go to the Mariner Motel. It was actually probably a little farther than Penn-Creek, or maybe about the same distance, because once you get to the road in Beaver Bay, it's still a 1.7 mile, slog through town to get to the Mariner. The cheap motel with the crusty proprietor who he has quite the reputation among the hiker crowd, and well earned. But it was a nice warm room. I got to crank the heat up and hang all my stuff up to dry. It was just like I covered the room, put up my rope and hung everything I had dried out, turned up the heat, ordered a pizza. Life was good again. Like, I'm going to make it. It was probably best, because then as I'm sitting there watching the Weather Channel, there's this huge line of thunderstorms rolling through. So I was grateful to be in this building and not camping in the midst of these giant thunderstorms, or I would have gotten even more soaked than I already was. So this is not a great way to start a trip. And so I did what anybody else would do. Well, most people. I posted on Facebook what was going on, because I had all these Rover friends and other friends who were like watching to see what would happen. Now, I had two different kinds of responses, and they fell absolutely strictly along Rover, non-Rover lines. All the non-Rovers are like, oh my gosh, you've done so great so far. I can't believe all you've done. This is so incredible. Take your time, chill out, relax, spend that time in the hotel. And all the Rovers were like, get back out there. You got this. Every single one of them. Audrey, this is what my family and I call camping weather. So, I got that encouragement and I made a new plan. But then this also raises the question, the Mariner Motel, why in the world do I keep ending up here? This was another Rover trip. As Fran said, I coordinate bigger backpacking trips, and this was one of them. And we ended up back in, and yes, that hotel does in fact have red lights. So this keeps happening. Hopefully this is the last time. But at any rate, here's my new plan. Split Rock River, instead of the Crosby-Manitou, I decided to only go to Finland, but now we've got a problem, right? So that knocks it down, takes 12 miles off. It's 12 miles closer. That next, because the trail goes in sections between trailheads that vary in distance. And this particular section that I had to cut off was 12 miles. And I figured I could do 50. Maybe. We'll see. But the problem is my car. My car is parked at Crosby-Manitou, and if I'm going to stop at Finland, how am I going to get back to my car? So at that point, I called up the Superior Hiking Shuttle, and they arrived the next day and took me out to Crosby-Manitou, and then followed me back to Silver Bay, to where I'd gotten off the trail and parked at that trailhead. No, actually, from Crosby-Manitou, drove back to Finland, dropped my car off there, and then I got back in the shuttle, and then he drove me to the Silver Bay where I gotten off. And so I started in right where I'd gotten off trail the day before. And I still ended up paying for the shuttle. And actually, I think it was more than if I had just taken the original shuttle in the first place and not done that whole biking thing, which is probably what I should have done. So as I started out, fresh out of the car, it was, of course, sprinkling. So I'm getting wet, but everything I had was dry at that point. So I just zipped up and I'm like, okay, I can handle this. It's not going to rain a lot, because I knew that from the weather. I just knew it was going to be a little bit in the morning. And so I hiked up to Bean and Bear Lake. And if you know anything about the Superior Hiking Trail, you've probably heard about this. It's the most iconic spot on the trail, I think, or one of them, where there's these two inland lakes with these high cliffs over the top of them. And as I stood at the first one, I think that's Bean Lake, I could see this disturbance on the water. It was still kind of cloudy and hazy off in the distance, but I was dry. But I could see this disturbance on the water, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what's causing that. And then I realized, oh my God, it's more rain. and wind. And so I got my raincoat zipped up just in time when another blast of wind-blown rain hit me in the face. It was pretty incredible. But thankfully this time it didn't last long. And by the time I hiked up to Bear Lake, the next one, it had stopped and things were starting to dry out. So from then on, it was actually a better day. So now I'm hiking through Tettegouche State Park. And this is one of the more challenging parts of the trail. I wouldn't say it's the most challenging, but it's pretty close. It ranks right up there, especially if you do the spur trails like Round Mountain, which is straight up and then you walk around and then you go back right straight back down. And of course there's Mount Trudy. And I'm a big fan of spur trails. My trail name is Spur Trail. So I take in as many of these as I can. And this day was no different. What's cool is that up from Mount Trudy, you can look off down in the valley and you can see that series of beaver ponds. To think that beavers just made one after another of those, killing off the forest and making their pond, and then you can kind of watch them fill in over time. It's a pretty cool sight to look at the beaver ponds, and you can see a lot of them from up there. And then also from Round Mountain, you can get this nice view of Palisade Head on the right. A lot of people have been there because you can drive right there off of Highway 61 up to the cliffs and have a beautiful view of the lake from these cliff tops. So that's Tettegouche. And on this particular day, I decided to camp right in Tettegouche State Park in the campground, the upper campground. So I actually got a shower that night too. So, I was pretty fortunate. And that night it got cold. This is still mid-May. And I saw a few flakes of snow as I was making dinner that night. But I was fine. I was dry. All my stuff was dry, except my raincoat. And it had been a good day. But of course, this is what it looked like coming through the park. So this is really challenging hiking, and nothing I had done prepared me for the level of mud and roots and rocks. And oh my gosh, this was so much harder than anything I had seen in state parks like Afton or even Wild River. On the right-hand side, you'll see the drain pipe. If you've been up to the drain pipe recently, it has, they put steps in now. But I did this from the top. I came along the trail and I looked down this thing called the drain pipe, which actually goes on for a lot longer than what this picture shows. And I'm like, that can't be the trail. But by this point, I was like, what am I talking about? Of course it's the trail. It looks like it's the worst part, but it looks as bad as everything else I've seen. So I got to the bottom and finally saw the sign for the drain pipe. I had heard about the famous drain pipe. I just didn't realize I was going to do it on this trip. But I did. Going down, I just kind of sat down and scooched along on my behind and let my pack catch me sometimes. And so that's Tettegouche. Tough section of trail, but I got to see the high falls. And so here I am, getting off the trail just, for the little spur trail down to the campsite where I spent the night. Looking a little bit washed out, a little bit tired, but better than the day before. Got up the next morning and it was crystal clear. It was all frosty on the tent and frosty on the picnic table, but it was just a gorgeous, gorgeous morning. So I took the trail right past the high falls, and that was pretty cool. I'm guessing most of you have probably seen this. It was just a great start to the day. It was such a good start to the day that I even took the spur trail down to the two-step falls, which is just down from the high falls. And I took the other little spur trail up to the Fantasia overlook right here, which is just a neat place. And it was such a nice sunny day, and it was warmer. So I was feeling good at this point. Made my way past Wolf Ridge Environmental Learning Center, which my daughters were super excited about. Had to take some pictures there because they had been up there on like their 5th grade class trip or something like that. So they were all excited. So there I am dipping my toes into Raven Lake, cooling them down. Up over section 13 and then past over the boardwalk. There's like a 400-foot boardwalk over this giant beaver pond. There's the view from the beautiful section 13. There's just some awesome cliffs up there. And so this was really the day. So I had made it through that really crappy day 2, that day when I ended up at the Mariner. And so now I had made it through day 3, which was a tough day. It wasn't as bad. It was that tough day when I ended at Tettegouche. But now here on day 4 was all about sunshine and beautiful views, feet in the lake, nice waterfalls. So if you can make it to day 4, then you've got it. And so as I made my way down to the last campsite, Leskinen Creek, 3/4 of a mile outside of the campsite, there were bear tracks right in the middle of the trail, which were interesting. I was somewhat concerned, but I had prepared for it. I had my bear canister, and I ended up that night. And I don't have any pictures of the campsite that night, but I hiked on into this campsite. And when I got there, there were like 9 young guys there, and I was thinking they were probably college students. And I'm like, my gosh, here I am with all these men. And so I just went about my work setting up. I was kind of afraid at this point. Again, it's my first trip, and I've since way gotten over this. But what I learned as I got all set up was that it was actually an outward bound group. And there was the outward bound instructor and a teacher. And then all the rest of them were actually high school kids. And this was their first time in the woods. And most of them had no clue what they were doing. And they were all kind of, they were all uncomfortable too, because it was their first time. But me, by this point, I was ready to go. I came in and set up my tent like a pro, made dinner on my camp stove, like I'd been doing it all my life. Got my water, filtered it, hung a bear bag, or put out my bear canister. Life was good. I just looked like a pro. And meanwhile, they were fumbling and just wondering what to do. So this is pretty much how the trip ended. If you can make it to day 4, then you can feel like a success. And so then the next morning, all that was left was to get up and wander on out to the Finland Rec Center parking lot where my car was parked. And it was only a couple of miles, and I got in the car and headed on home. And a silver lining, that section that I didn't end up doing between Finland and Crosby-Manitou, I ended up doing that only 4 months later on the first Rover backpacking trip that I ever led, where I took others on a trip with me. It was my 4th backpacking trip at that point, so I had a little more experience behind me, and these 5 wonderful and daring people came with me. But we ended up enjoying on that section of trail that I had skipped the first time, watching this beautiful sunset. And if you have 6 people just sitting there on the shore, completely silent for like 15 minutes, watching the color change, oh my gosh, that was so special. And it was such an amazing group of people. So that was the good that came out of not doing that section right then and doing it later on in the fall. And that's my story. Thank you.
Bravo, Alison. That was wonderful. I really enjoyed that. Thanks.
You learned a lot in those 4 days.
Oh my gosh, that I did.
I like that little story at the end, like meeting the outward band group, and you like after 4 days you look like a pro, and then like just the contrast between you and the other group.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. It was a good feeling after what was a really, really rough start. And you would have thought like I would have been prepared for that. I mean, I started out reading Wild, for heaven's sake. Yeah. So anybody have any questions? I don't know if there are any in the chat or not.
I just want to say I really admire how you did your research and then you got there and you made a plan. And then you had to make another plan. So you really were kind of like in the moment. You really did a good, and I've been on that trail thinking I could rollerblade it because I could do the Gateway Trail. Well, that was a joke. And that you're right, that it's nothing like I've ever been on since. The tree roots and how steep it is and everything. So good, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Well, thank you much. Let's see, how many backpacking trips have I been on now, solo and leading? I have no idea. I know when just that year I did 6 on the SHT that year, and then no, would have been 5. And then did another one in February that I didn't camp on. I stayed at a Rovers house. They live in Duluth, a couple of them, and or they did live in Duluth. And then I did a final 100-mile from the northern terminus at the Canada border down 100 miles that next year. But then I led beginner backpacking trips. I coordinated them before we had this new beginner backpacking program. I had been doing one of those every year, and then doing like a overnight before that. But otherwise, I've been on trips. I've been on solo trips up to the SHT. I've been out on Isle Royal, down to Buckskin Gulch on the Arizona-Utah border. Did that week in the Colorado. So I don't know. I lost count.
How do
Let's see,
you
what
think
else
it
do we have?
compares to Colorado hiking here, that trail? Or I guess the
How does it-
ease of hiking, I guess you could say. I've done a lot of
Well-
hiking in Colorado too, but yeah.
The SHT I thought was way harder.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, yeah.
You know, with
Because the
my
terrain.
experience with Western trails is that they tend to be made for pack animals to also use them, which means you can't go like straight up, some rocky, rooty thing like that. Animals can't handle that. And so they have to plan switchbacks better and plan routes, differently than what they do. So, the elevation is different, but boy, I think it's a pretty tough trail.
What was your favorite day there of the 4 days you did? Or the favorite section? I mean, some were really hard. The second day
You know
was.
what? I actually like that.
Which was your favorite? I guess. Yeah.
I don't know that I have a favorite in that section because it's all so spectacular. Like Mount Trudy has great views.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Yeah.
The Baptism River can't be beat. The Fantasia Overlook, Section 13, the Split Rock River, it's all good. And I've been back and I've done all of that again, at least one more time, some maybe twice. So, I've seen it all in better weather now and just better condition myself.
Really enjoyed it. I think.
Alison, I met you on one of your later sections north of Two Harbors.
Oh, really?
And I was a scruffy looking man that you shared a campsite with. And so
Really?
I'm wondering at what point.
Was that Silver Creek?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I totally remember you. Yeah.
And I'm wondering at what point you dealt with your reticence to camp with scruffy looking men and what helped you to deal with that?
I don't know. I think I got over it on that trip.
Because we
especially
seem very comfortable. You seem very comfortable.
I was at that point. But yeah, the last night on this trip with the 4 guys, I was totally over it at that point. I was like, see, I can do this.
Yeah.
It was just all those lessons that they dump into your head before you leave the first time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all good. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining.
You're up. Thanks. It's a great presentation. I congratulate you on your growth in backpacking.
Thank you very much. And I must have figured it out pretty quickly because you saw me only on my second trip. It was the very next one that you met me on.
You were still learning some things, as I recall. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, we had some long talks about some things. So it's kind of cool.
Oh. Yep. Still learning.
Yeah, aren't we all?
Yeah.
I love
Anything
how
else in the chat?
flexible and adaptable you were. And the SHT is definitely will try your patience and fortitude. I learned that on many sections. I woke up to snow one morning and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right.
What time of the year did you do your trip?
Oh, so this one was I left in mid-May. But then, like I said, I did others that year. So of the 7 trips that it took me to complete, there was May, July, August, September, October, and then there was the one in February when I did the Duluth section because it actually goes right through Duluth. And then I did the northern terminus down to Oberg in May again. So it actually took 53 weeks. I didn't finish it in a year. But both the first and the last trips ended on May 20th. All right. Oh, wait, there's one more thing in the chat. And thank you, everyone. Oh, what's my plan for the next backpacking trip? I don't have one just yet. I'm going to be starting grad school soon. And so I don't know what that's going to do for my time. But the cool thing is now I can just decide to go backpacking, and I always keep, food here and fuel and all the rest. And I can just throw everything together now and go do a quick overnight somewhere with, very little prep at this point, just because I know what I'm doing. So like the last one that I did that, the last time I did that, I went up to the Ice Age Trail by Chippewa Marine. That was a really neat section. So who knows, maybe just go up and do a whole chunk of the SHT or something like that. Or every now and then I'll go out and do, kind of redo that overnight at Wild River. I've also been known to park out the bottom side of Wild River and hike 15 miles up to the other end and camp there and then hike back. So easy stuff. Let's see what we got here. Do I keep using my bike or switch to the shuttles after this trip? Let's see. I've used shuttles before. There was the one trip that I coordinated where we had multiple cars. I did another one where I went with a single rover and the two of us each took our cars. So we did our own little interesting little hopscotch thing south of Duluth. Sometimes I do out and backs now. There was one section, the Gooseberry to Split Rock section, which isn't really a section, but like the day I did that, I just did a bike shuttle because it's only like 4 miles in the Gitchigami. I did that in an evening. So I don't know, it varies. I would consider doing a bike shuttle again, but not if I end up getting a day of the trip cut off. Let's see, there's something else on there too. Oh, favorite food items that I keep on hand for those last minute trips. I like good to go backpacking food. It's really great stuff. It's made in Maine, all with ingredients that you've all heard of before. They started out with only vegetarian options, and now they have a few things with like meat and fish. But they've got a lot of great options for vegetarians if you are. I'm not, but I really like their stuff. And then I just kind of have my standard, granola or Cliff Bars and nuts and stuff like that. Let's see, what dates did you do this trip you talked about? So that was mid-May. Yep. Oh, and that was the follow-up. Which actually mid-May on the SHT is kind of early. Not because of snow, but usually the mud is worse than what it is later on. I think kind of the best time to be on that trail is September. It's just kind of amazing then. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to present again, and hope to see you all out on the trail sometime soon.
Okay, thanks very much, Alison. Great
Thanks,
presentation. And thanks for all the questions too.